We have just passed one of those thresholds on the calendar that ushers us into summer, and it's already been an active summer for Iowa athletics, and of course, Iowa football included, with Gary Barta retiring. And of course, the search is on for his replacement. We will talk Iowa football, of course, with players reporting here very soon. This is our Hawkeyes live show that we've done for 95 consecutive weeks. Gary Barta from the Hawkeye of the Storm, of course, front and center. Join Corey and his coverage of Iowa athletics on From the Hawkeye of the Storm. Corey, how you doing today?
Doing good, Mark. We're counting as we get to June, but it feels like once you hit June, you really start counting down the days. So for the first time in a while, we've got Iowa fans that care about baseball have some baseball to watch, with the Hawkeyes being one of three teams making the field. So I'll be interested to see if they can do some damage in the Terre Haute region, and we'll see if they can get onto a super regional. It'll be a fun storyline and something to keep us busy here in June.
Terre Haute, Indiana, correct?
That's
so right. Who is hosting that?
Indiana State.
Indiana State and Terre Haute. That's right.
I believe they're
the Larry Bird.
Yeah, I believe they're the 14 overall seed.
Okay.
In that region. So
is that close to Evansville?
What's that?
Is that close to Evansville?
That's a good question. I don't think it's that close because you've got a D1 school in Evansville. I don't know how close it is.
Because I usually know where certain towns in the Midwest are, but I'm not that familiar with Terre Haute, except for the name in Indiana State. Then, since you mentioned it, I was once offered a job in Evansville, Indiana.
Okay.
I think it's down near the border of Ohio.
Yeah, Todd Licklider. Todd Licklider got hired by, well, he doesn't work there anymore, but
the Purple Aces.
Yeah, you're right. The Purple Aces, yeah.
I haven't thought of that in a long time.
Yeah.
All right. Yes. Has anything come out, not officially, but where has the conversation gone since Gary Barta retired in regards to possible replacements and any other new names that have come to the forefront?
I just think it's Beth gets her job to lose. I for the most part, everything I've heard has been very positive about her. She filled in on an interim basis as the AD at Minnesota for a brief stint. She was, of course, the AD at Ball State. Apparently, she was behind some of the early NIL collective stuff there, which is, I guess, a good sign if you're talking about an AD that embraces the school's collective. And boy, if you're an Iowa fan, you just want that, right? And if you're Iowa, you're smart. We talked last week, Mark, about one of my fears with replacing Gary Barta, and that is that the university would move in a direction to compensate for some of the tenure-long struggles of Gary Barta, meaning he's had issues with discrimination suits, gender discrimination, racial discrimination. His department, they've dealt with these things. So you do not want the university to hire on a criteria, at least I don't want the university to hire on the criteria of, okay, how do we compensate for those misfortunes and those shortcomings? If they do, fine, but they better be qualified to do the job. Now, here's the thing about Beth. She would fit a couple of those criteria. One being she is a woman. I'm not saying that makes her more or less qualified, but I'm saying from a business standpoint, administrative standpoint, you could see why they may feel that way. And also the fact that she has somewhat of a slight track record as it relates to NIL. That's an automatic plus. So those two things automatically are like anti-Gary Bartas, right? Like from some people's perspectives. I'm not saying she'd succeed here. I'm not saying that should be the primary criteria, but those two things are going to be viewed by a lot of people as positives. And I listened to an interview with Beth when she was at Ball State. Sounds like she's just a really, really smart woman. I mean, I don't know how else to describe based on what I heard from her. I'm sure Gary Barta is very smart too. I'm not saying that he isn't, but I'm certainly I'm glad I'm not on the board of regents. I'm glad I'm not the president trying to search for a replacement because, as I said last week, boy, my first thought is, okay, who's been a successful coach with connections? Who's been a successful coach with connections? Go down the line, and we talked about Bob Stoops and these different people. But as we acknowledged last week, it likely won't be a former D1 head coach. Now, Beth I believe she was a soccer player back in the day, so she's a former college athlete. I think she coached soccer as well, albeit I don't think at the D1 level. But my guess is she'll end up being the AD. How long will it take for this national search to transpire? I don't know. but she will definitely be one of the candidates. And unless somebody wows this university in an interview, I have a hard time seeing her not get the job. It's kind of one of those things, Mark, where it's like, if she doesn't get the job, is she going to be sticking around? Right? I mean, you just see this in all different lines of professions. Courtney Eldridge in the basketball team is a perfect example. He came here and worked up the ranks. He had connections to Fran McCaffrey, paid his dues, and now he's a full-time, one of Fran McCaffrey's 3 full-time assistants. So this is just how things work, and the writing on the wall states that Beth Getz will probably be Barta's replacement in August. Well, I shouldn't say, hold on, not in August, because remember, she is going to be the interim AD. But we'll see how long it takes for them to appoint a full-time replacement.
I'm amazed at how many people, whether that be in sports or in other realms, more important realms of society, believe that hiring someone of a particular gender or a particular race shows more commitment to those initiatives than actually action and policy.
Yeah, it's true. But
get it done by what you do, by the policies that you
acknowledge
initiate and the actions that you take.
But you and I can both acknowledge, Mark, that this does transpire. This does take place.
Oh, yes, it does.
All over the place. So would it surprise you at all if those were pieces of the pie that Iowa uses to, or pieces of the recipe that Iowa uses to hire their new AD? So, and here's the thing, Mark, when it works out, fine, great. Like, it's going to please some people, and then it's going to please other people because the person worked out and she was a great candidate and a great AD. I won't say this. I saw somebody on my channel. Won't say the name. You can go back and look at comments if you're interested. Somebody on my channel a couple days ago. Oh, we're going to hire a woman AD. Well, that's sexist. I'm sorry. But, I mean, good Lord, man. Talk about swinging the pendulum in a different direction. Like,
yeah, that's bad.
There are a lot of really talented women administrators out there, women coaches in different fields. So, as you and I have talked about, Mark, hiring process with any of these things should not be based on gender, should not be based on race, should be based on resume and who's qualified for the. Also, shouldn't be based on who's related to who. Hint, hint. Offensive coordinator, head coach at Iowa. So, anyways, we can get off that soapbox, but those are my 2 cents.
Yeah. Yeah, that's just. I don't know that there's something that we can talk about any more than that continues to, despite that being at the forefront of what's going on with that football program and the Achilles heel of that football program, that it still just continues to hit me in a certain way where I'm like, that really goes on, where there are more qualified, better qualified people out there to run an offense, but he's the guy running the offense.
Let me say this, Mark. I've had a little bit longer to think about the whole Barta situation. And if anybody missed our show, we had Don Patterson on Friday evening. We had Brad Heinrichs on again. He showed his face for close to an hour once again. It was awesome to have those two together. And so I'm kind of playing third wheel in that whole show. But man, the more the further away I get from this whole situation, Gary Barta is, I think, 59 years old. He had another year left in the contract. He's making 7 figures. I don't think that I have a hard time believing that he willingly hung it up. Don't you, Mark? I mean, I know you're not connected to the program or anything, but I think we're so used to things taking place in the routine fashion that things take place, especially at Iowa, and especially with how this administration under Barta has been operated. But as it relates to this, I have a hard time thinking, especially with what's happened in recent months and with the state of Iowa auditor calling for his resignation, calling for his firing. Other bigwigs, if you will, have been very critical of Gary Barta. My guess is that he was asked to step down or told he needed to step down, and he was able to do it. He was given the opportunity to do it in a dignified fashion. Now, I'm not being dogmatic because I don't know that. We may never know that. We probably will never know that as a matter of fact. But my guess is that he was forced out, for lack of a better term, and that's okay. I'm okay with that, man. I'd almost rather that, because I've said this before, and I think you've emulated this thought. It's where we were. It's not about what you did for us 10, 15 years ago. It's about what you've done for us or what you've done for me lately. And lately, Gary Barta has cost the university a lot of money and has been behind some serious issues, and has supposedly been overseeing a department with a lot of different issues, despite the fact that certain teams have been winning. Look, if they didn't have teams, like the women's basketball team making the Final Four mark, and Kirk Ferentz somehow finding a way to win 7-8 games a year on average, and men's basketball making the tournament every year, and Rick Heller doing what he's doing, and wrestling being the second best program in the country, I'm guessing Gary Barta wouldn't have made it even close to 2023, because he's had some of these issues for a number of years. But as I said last week, giving him the credit that I believe he's due, he has had teams under his oversight that have been very successful over the course of time. We say successful. That's all. I mean, beauty's in the eye of the beholder. Not maybe successful to the level of some other programs, but from the perspective of the people that matter, a lot of programs at Iowa have been successful during Gary Barta's tenure.
And then the one obvious conclusion to make about that success is whether he hired that particular head coach. So he has to be given that amount of credit for the hirings that he made that led to the success.
But as we talked about, retention is a fair argument as well. He didn't hire Kirk Ferentz, but he did retain Kirk Ferentz during a time period in which Kirk Ferentz was a major candidate for other jobs. Now, maybe he had zero influence on that decision by Kirk to stick it out at Iowa back in that 2008 to 2010 timeframe where he was a hot name out there. But as we said before, you have to look at the guy in charge and either blame or give some blame or give some credit when things work out or don't work out. So I'd be anxious to know. I'd be anxious to, if you could put a lie detector test on Kirk Ferentz, which I'm not saying Kirk would ever lie, but I'd like to know exactly, what was your decision? What tell us the honest truth. Was it all about the family? Was it all about just feeling happy in Iowa City? Was it something that, with the relationship with the administration? I mean, I doubt it was that to a large extent, but I'd be curious to know.
If you are ready to roll, we could go with various ratings and rankings. I've got an Athlons in my hand right here, and I'll serve up some various ratings and rankings connected to Iowa and the Big Ten. And then, we'll save the best for last. We can go through my ratings and rankings. But so Athlons here has Iowa going 8-4, 5-4 in the Big Ten, second place to Wisconsin. Wisconsin 6-3, Iowa 5-4, tied with Minnesota. And I assume that they are telling us that Iowa, they're predicting to defeat Minnesota to be in second place. So we both know, based on our conversations, I believe that would be on the low end of where you would project the Hawkeyes this year.
But it's on the high end of what Vegas thinks, right? So Vegas has Iowa at 7.5. So Athlon's got them at the over, which I would agree with. But, I know we've went through the schedule how many times, but 5-4 in the conference, when I was seeing the idea of maybe 7-5 or even 8-4, I'm thinking, okay, they probably have Iowa losing in Ames. But no, Athlon's got Iowa going 5-4 in the conference. So the 4 losses again, we're playing the same game we have for several weeks. Penn State, I guess Wisconsin on the road. Who are the other 2 losses? At Nebraska? Somebody got mad when I implied that might happen a few weeks back.
They've got Nebraska 3-6.
Yeah, so again, the math has to work out, right? Michigan State at home.
They've got Michigan State at 4-5. Maybe I get.
There's got to be a mathematical sensibility with all of this.
Well, I assume that they're at least smart enough for that the math would add up in terms of 500 within the league. But you're right. Not only does it have to add up within the league, you have to be able to connect where those losses are, and they have to make sense.
So Illinois would probably be on the that's in Kinnick
at 4-5.
Well, I guess they have them losing to them. Like I said, we've went over this so many. Rutgers, where do they have Rutgers?
3-6.
I mean, look at the schedule, Mark. They got to, if you're looking at the schedule based on Athlon's projections, they're playing a bunch of teams who are projected to be under 500 at the end of the year. I mean, isn't that crazy? So they've
Yeah.
definitely got them losing to Penn State and Wisconsin. There's no question about it. They have them
Yes.
losing to those two teams. But you just said that based on where they have the standings, they have them beating Minnesota. We would assume they have them beating Northwestern, probably beating Illinois. So again, I guess I could pull up the schedule if we want to do this again. But
Yeah. Wisconsin and Penn State are the only obvious choices for losses. And then otherwise, they're losing to teams that they're going to be higher in the standings to in the other two games.
Purdue's at home.
Purdue's 3-6.
Yeah. I mean,
according to Athlon's.
I don't know if that's Athlon looking at. Do you think Athlon is at all influenced? Did this come out before the Vegas totals came out?
Well, it takes a while to produce a magazine, so
Yeah.
I'm guessing that this has, been tucked away for a while.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, it's interesting that it's not again, I'm not a betting man, but I'm just talking about the totals from Athlon, the totals from Vegas. It is interesting to see all these prognosticators predicting Iowa at 7-5 or 8-4. And I think most are toward the 8-4 mark. Who is the guy from? I don't even bring up a competitor because I don't really think he's a competitor, Mark, because you're a lot better than he is. The guy for On3 that he's a former football player.
I don't
know.
He's
a commentator on YouTube. Some people probably know who I'm talking about, but he's a commentator on YouTube. I think it was On3's way of trying to compensate for the success of Josh Pate over at 247 Sports. But this guy's a former football player, and I saw somebody sent this to me because I don't have time to watch YouTube stuff, just like you don't have time to watch other people on YouTube, Mark. But this guy literally said one of his best bets was to take Iowa at the under. And I thought, you're an idiot. I didn't say that in the comments, but I mean, that was my first thought. That's foolish. That is foolish. But again, I mean, maybe there's something that everybody else knows that I don't, and you don't seem to know what these people know. So what are we missing? So what is the position? I guess we've looked at the schedule as it is, Mark. What are the positions on this roster that you project or you think could end up failing Iowa, could end up being the downfall?
Well, wide receiver is a mess.
Okay. All right.
Okay. Wide receiver's a mess.
So we'll assume that when you say it's a mess,
it's full of question marks.
It's less of a mess than it was a month ago.
we don't know that it's a mess, but it's full of question marks.
I will say this. Let me just address the wide receiver position for a second. I've had some people. I had a person who listens to the show reach out to me not that long ago and say, "Who would you rather take, Caleb Brown or Keegan Johnson at full strength?" I don't know. Probably Keegan Johnson. He's more proven than Caleb Brown. Now, Caleb Brown was a higher recruit and more thought of recruit, but Keegan Johnson was a 4-star as well, Mark. So let's just acknowledge the fact that, yes, I know Keegan was out last year, but Arlen Bruce and Keegan Johnson were two pretty solid 4-star wide receivers. Well, I think Arlen was a 3 according to some, but pretty good recruits. Arlen was healthy last year, didn't have any help around him. Keegan was dealing with medical health issues throughout the year. My point is, I'm not going to assume that they have upgraded at that position. Maybe they have. But they bring Ragaini back. They lose Keegan. They lose Arlen Bruce. And they bring Seth Anderson, who's from Charleston Southern, and Caleb Brown, a guy who has not played really at all at Ohio State in. So maybe those guys are upgrades. But, Mark, would it surprise you at all if Arlen Bruce goes down to Stillwater and ends up being their number one guy? Wouldn't shock me. You see that video I was retweeted a few weeks back of him running routes down there at an Oklahoma State practice? I mean, it looked like the defender was on ice. I'm not saying that's going to be what happens during an actual game, but would it surprise you at all to see him have a lot of success at Oklahoma State? It would not me at all. So, part of this is system, part of this is personnel, part of it's system, and a big part of it's quarterback. And that's why I have a lot more confidence in the wide receiving core this year, because they've got a better quarterback throwing to them. But I agree with you. Wide receiver could very well fail them. I will say I listened to, oh man, now his name is, you're going to be ashamed of me because this is a guy I should know his name. Is it Jamie Morris, former Michigan?
Yes.
Back? Did I get the name
running
right?
back?
Okay. So listen to an interview with Jamie Morris, who I believe is involved with Michigan radio, I think. He commented on Eric All and Cade McNamara. And, he's a Michigan guy. He's got some pretty strong connections to Iowa. I think he married into a family of somebody in the Iowa media. But anyways, he was extremely complimentary of Cade McNamara, but he was even more complimentary of Eric All. And he said, yeah, heading into last year before that Eric All injury, maybe you would disagree or agree, Mark. He thinks Eric All had a chance to be the best tight end in the country last year heading into the season before that injury. Now, where was he projected on the draft boards? I don't know. Can we go back and look at that? I don't know. I wasn't following it close enough. He is, as I commented after watching the open spring practice, he is incredibly athletic, really smooth with his routes. And what Jamie had made a point of saying is once he figured out how to catch, it just took him to a different level because he had all the tools, but he dropped a lot of balls early in practice and his time at Michigan. And once he learned how to use his hands, he developed into a star. And so I'm still hesitant to think, okay, they're going to be leaps and bounds better than they were last year when you had Sam Laporta, who, by the way, has turned a lot of heads up in Michigan at Detroit in early spring practice practice for the Lions. But I have a hard time saying, yeah, they're going to be better than that. But at the same time, man, with Eric All, if he can be fully recovered from that back injury, which I would think he is, I wouldn't think the staff would have taken him if he wasn't. Maybe they would have just to be able to get Cade. Maybe that was part of the deal. I don't know. But my guess is he's going to be just fine. With him and Lachey, they're going to be pretty darn good at tight end, Mark. And they're deeper than they were last year because I think the two guys behind them are more prepared this year as well. You made a funny face when I said something about Jamie Morris's opinion on Eric All.
Well, I just think that anytime that you have somebody who's connected to the situation, I value their opinion, of course, and especially someone that knows the sport as well as Jamie Morris does. I do think that their coaches are locked in on their assignment and their team and what they're doing and the people that they know, and they don't know what's going on throughout the rest of the country. I
But
don't
he's
know
not
that.
a coach.
Pardon me?
He's not a coach.
Well, he's locked in on Michigan football.
I understand. Yeah.
Yeah, Brock Bowers is the best tight end in the country from Georgia.
Well,
He's better than Eric All.
Well, we're not talking about this year. We're talking about prior to 2022.
Yeah, he was better than Eric All prior to
One could argue
2022.
Sam Laporta was better than Eric All. I mean,
Yeah.
couldn't
I'm
that
not
be
saying
argued?
that. Yeah,
Yeah, I'm not. And I'm
to
not. So I'm
say
not
that he's the best tight end in the country. That's a bit extreme.
yeah. I'm just saying
He's really good.
he's really good, and I think Lachey couldn't be really good. And I look back to 20. I know people make these comparisons, and I guess we'll tickle the ears of Hawkeye fans for a minute because I usually shut these comparisons down. But I do think back to 2017. And what happened in 2017? You have a lot of hype around Noah Fant, and who emerges as TJ Hawkinson, this unknown commodity from, was he from Carroll or Sheraton? I can't remember, one of the sea towns here in Iowa. And so both guys were stars, and both guys end up being first-round draft picks. I'm not saying Luke Lachey is on a similar trajectory to TJ Hawkinson. I don't know that Luke has the athletic upside that TJ has. TJ's turned out to be, I think, he's one of the best tight ends in the NFL. I mean, he's a top, I think, 5 or 6 tight end in the NFL without question. You might be able to make an argument higher. So, I wouldn't be shocked if Luke Lachey ends up being really, really good this year. And with the quarterback that they have in Cade McNamara, who's already got tons of chemistry with Eric All. Didn't realize, there's another thing Jamie said, he's apparently one of Eric All's best friends. And I believe they were roommates together at Michigan. That's all really helpful. I mean, that's going to help. Even when Cade was out in the spring, that chemistry is still there. So I don't know. We'll see. But yeah, wide receiver is a fair concern. We've discussed that. Are you concerned about running back, Mark, from the outside looking in with Caleb Johnson back and LaShawn Williams back?
Well, not based on, I thought they showed us something 2 seasons ago, obviously, at the conclusion of the year in the bowl game, and then more so Johnson last season.
Yeah.
No, I don't have, I don't know that they're an exceptional tandem, but I have no concerns there. I was going to offensive line from wide receiver.
Okay. Yeah, that's fair. It's fair. Then they brought in a couple transfers. I would assume, you assume, we said this last year, you would assume that guys are getting better just because they're developing. They got a lot of older guys back, and then they bring in a couple of transfers. So you would think that means that those transfers are going to start. At least that was probably the idea when they were recruited here. But yeah, that's a fair question mark. And one thing Jamie did say, play devil's advocate for a second, one thing he did say is K does need protection. And he's not Johnny Manziel. So he's going to need a clean pocket. But you could say that about a lot of guys, Mark. You'd say that about Tom Brady, right? Tom Brady needed a strong offensive line throughout his career, and more often than not, he had one.
And maybe Jamie Morris says that, not understanding that Cade McNamara, from a mobility standpoint, is a huge upgrade from Spencer Petras.
He is, and he pointed that out, that he is mobile.
Okay,
he's not JJ McCarthy mobile, but I don't know. I mean, I don't know that there's as big of a difference as some people think there was between McCarthy's. I don't think McCarthy is Johnny Manziel either. So, anyways, those are fair question marks. I'm not, as I've talked about in the past, I'm not concerned about kicker. How could you be with Drew Stevens coming back? How could you be concerned about punter with Torrey Taylor back? And then let's not forget, Mark, not only did they add Caleb Brown as a receiver, they also added him as a return guy. So he's a guy who's thought of to be an option on special teams. Doesn't mean he'll be the punt return option, certainly with Cooper DeJean back. But special teams are just, unless they suffer from serious injury across the board, is not a concern. Last year at this time, Mark, we were going into the season and going into summer thinking, who the heck is the kicker? Because you had two kickers that performed terribly at the open spring practice and throughout spring. And, Drew Stevens eventually emerged, but at the time we didn't know that. So, that's not a concern.
What I do think is somewhat of a concern is the weight that's placed on the special teams and the defense. And what I mean by that is, where normally if you had a more balanced production and contribution from all phases, then you wouldn't have to look at various aspects of the defense as not being a concern, but being a concern compared to being elite. That may be, who else did they lose in the secondary besides Riley Moss? Didn't they lose somebody else substantial? They lost Terry Roberts through the transfer portal, but
they lost Kevon Merriweather.
Yeah. Okay. So the secondary, again, do I think the Iowa secondary is going to be good? Absolutely. Do I think it's going to be as good as it typically is? Maybe not.
I mean, there have been years where the secondary is subpar. I mean, let's be honest. Cornerback, especially with injury, has been a bugaboo at times. And that's odd to say that with Phil Parker, but sometimes you can't control the injury bug. Like, recruiting is what it is, and Phil Parker does an unbelievable job developing these guys, but you can only develop, I think, so many, because not everybody's going to end up panning out. And again, Phil has squeezed every last drop out of that bottle. But yeah, that's a fair, cornerback is always a fair concern. I got a good friend who's he makes that comment every year. If there's one concern I have about the defense, it's the corners. And, they're really talented at safety, with Xavier Wampa back and Sebastian Castro having played quite a bit of cash last year. But they lose a guy who was a stalwart in Kayvon Merriweather, who's also a pretty darn good athlete. So, yeah, there might be some lumps you take there. And, yeah, if Quinn Schulte goes down or Xavier Wampa goes down, who's in after that? I don't know the answer to that, because you slide Castro over, and then who plays Cash? You slide DeJean back down, then who plays the other corner spot? So, no, Iowa's not the epitome of depth, but they're not normally the epitome of depth. Like, when are they ever deep across the board? It's just hard to do that. For things to work into and fall into place, Mark, a team like Iowa, or even you could say Wisconsin, with the exception of maybe a few positions, you better stay somewhat healthy. If you're decimated by injury, I'm not saying 2012 was all about injury. Go back to 2012 and they lose Brandon Scherf and Andrew Denal against Penn State at home under the lights, and the season took a dump and they went 4-8. That's what can happen when you get dealt these massive blows. Like if Cade McNamara goes down week 1, and I'm trying to think who would be a good example on the other side. Cooper DeJean goes down in week 1. Those two guys go down. Oh, yeah, we might be looking at that Vegas total sweating a little bit. So, yeah, it's a fun discussion to have, and I think they're probably done in the portal, but things can always. Hey, with the portal, and I see grad transfers. I did see that. I shouldn't say they're done in the portal, because they are in on a kid. We could talk about this, Mark, if you want to. I did see that Iowa has offered a kid from UMass, Josh Wallace, grad transfer cornerback from UMass, who has also reported offers from Michigan, Oregon State, Oklahoma, Virginia Tech, Michigan State, Indiana, Penn State. So there you go. I mean, he's got some high major offers, and I believe was an all-conference guy at UMass and a 4-year starter. So, you add him, Mark. There's a piece of your concern, maybe somewhat quelched, if you will. But they've actually surprisingly missed on a couple of DBs in this cycle of the portal. But I'm guessing that would be the last. I don't think they're probably going to go after another wide receiver. Don't really have room. But if they can get a guy like Josh Wallace, they may add one more piece.
I somewhat apologize to anyone that watches the various live streams that I engage in, that I'm obviously responsible for. I start them, but I seem to drag this Ohio State Michigan debate. It's just, it doesn't stop. It's every day. It's just unbelievable. So they're back at it. I halted this during our Big Ten live show last night, I believe it was, and I basically said, if you believe what I'm going to say and you believe I'm spitting out truth, which I am, and perspective, this is basically how you size up this rivalry. And I said, Michigan has A, B, and C. Ohio State has A, B, and C. And that's the end of the bragging rights debate. But it just continues, which is a good thing for business. So go right ahead. Hair trigger here. Can you imagine, Corey, can you imagine watching an Iowa offense that is the best offense in the Big Ten, as it was in 2002, as Hair Trigger is pointing out? Can you just imagine that feeling, that response you would have to watching that caliber of an offense at Iowa?
No, because I was still holding my mom's hand on the way to school in 2002. So no, I can't. But I will say this: I'll be releasing a show tomorrow. And this will be the second time he's been on the show. Marco Lainez, quarterback of the future for the Hawkeyes. He'll be getting here to Iowa City very soon. And it's funny that Hair Trigger brings up 2002 because once again, I talk with Marco about Brad Banks and how he kind of has emulated Brad Banks' style. A guy who can move, and Cade McNamara is no Brad Banks. I get that. But when you have an offensive line that struggled as much as it has, a wide receiving core that has been as underperforming as it has, a quarterback that's as immobile as he has been, you're left with almost nothing, Mark, because you can't run the ball. And you basically all Iowa's had is really good tight ends. Imagine what the offense would have been like without Sam Laporta. Let's just talk about that for a second. All right. And the reason I bring this up is we don't know. I mean, if I know McNamara's not Brad Banks, I think Marco Lainez is closer to that. Certainly not anointing him as the next Brad Banks Heisman finalist, but it will be interesting to see what this offense can be like under or with a more mobile quarterback. We saw that somewhat in 2015 with C.J. Beathard, but let's remember in 2016, Beathard was really dinged up all year. Go back to that Outback Bowl. I was out at that game in Tampa, and he was on his last leg, literally. So I just wonder if you have a couple of guys who can take the top off of defense. You hope that's Seth Anderson. You hope that's Caleb Brown. Pair that with a couple of really good tight ends and a quarterback who can scramble when he needs to. I'm not saying they're going to get back to 2002 heights and be one of the best offenses in the Big Ten. But as we've said on countless occasions, Mark, they don't have to be the best. They don't even have to be close to the best. They just have to be closer to average. They can't be the worst, right? They can't be the worst. So I'll be fascinated to see. This is going to be an interesting era, not only with Gary Barta walking away, and that's part of it, but this is an exciting time, Mark. It's an exciting time for college football fans and people everywhere because of conference realignment and the new TV deals and all that stuff. It's fascinating. NIL, transfer portal. Some people think it's destroying the sport. I'm not going to go that far. But here's why it should be fascinating for Iowa fans. Yes, you're going to have more of a challenge on your hands with these new teams coming to the conference and the divisions being realigned. But you also have a new era at quarterback. I mean, if things work out, you're going to have Cade McNamara for 1 to 2 years and Marco Lainez for probably 2 to 3 years at least. And now maybe one of those guys doesn't work out, one of them gets hurt, one of them leaves. That's always possible. But that's a different era than the Nate Stanley, Spencer Petras, with all due respect to Nate Stanley, who endeared himself to Iowa fans. These guys have a different level of mobility, whether Brian Ferentz is here or not. I don't see Marco Lainez transferring if Brian Ferentz doesn't make it past this year. I don't think that's going to happen. So it's an interesting time. It's a fascinating time. We've talked about implications this year heading into 2024. Will Kirk make that move? Will he continue with this program into the new era of college football? That's yet to be seen, but it's a fun time.
Talking Hawkeyes football with all of you each and every Tuesday, 5:30 Eastern, 4:30 Central. If you are new to the show, and I find this out just about every day, that there are people out there lurking that don't necessarily make any kind of comments and so forth. We certainly want you to enjoy the show in any way and enjoy the content otherwise in any way you would like. But it is nice, as I got a couple of phone calls just here in the last couple of days from some viewers that said, I've been watching for years. This time I thought, okay, I've never commented in the live chat or anything, but I'm going to make a call and ask you a question. So just let us know that you're out there. Even if you just jump in the chat and say hi and say, I've been watching for 2 years, but I've never said hi. That would be a good thing. So we appreciate you being here. And again, this also works because you guys get out there and let people know that we're here doing this show. All right, Corey, you let me know where I missed it here. Okay. So, folks, if you want the deep dive, it's over on the main channel. I produced a video series where I went through 133 FBS programs and ranked them all from 133 all the way up to number 1 in basically groups of 25. And so the final video, Iowa did make the final video, the top 25, and I placed them at number 23 in the nation.
Which currently is you're ranking program. You're not ranking coaches. You're ranking
program. So, I'm not even ranking the team for this year. And this is what people confuse, regardless of me explaining. And I put up a list that says tradition, brand, recruiting, facilities, fan base size, popularity. Obviously, the 22 team does factor in largely, and then the projection toward 23. So yes, it's largely about the current football team, but it's about all these other things as well. It's a program ranking, not a team ranking.
Now, I will say, here's my only criticism, Mark, because I'm not smart enough to debate you on this entire list. But here's my only criticism: when I believe me, I watched from start to finish your breakdown that your cut up that you posted on the Iowa channel, on this very channel that we're streaming on, regarding Iowa's ranking, and you were very critical of Kirk Ferentz. Now, I think one could argue that because Kirk Ferentz has been here for 24 years, he is the face of the program. So when you talk about Kirk Ferentz, he's basically synonymous with the program. Is that fair? Like,
yes,
had 2 coaches for like 45 years. Yep. So it is what it is there.
And I actually point that out at various times during these videos to say the component of the head coach is much a different weight for some programs than others. Absolutely. And he's on the high end.
So I thought you came down a little hard on him in that video. I thought you were a little hard on him, Mark. I think
once I got on a roll, once it started to come out of my mouth, I couldn't stop because it just, again, it flabbergasts me that somebody in his position would allow that to stand in the program's way of achieving more.
How many times now you've heard me wait and kind of take a step back from the criticism here with some recent transfer portal moves, but I'm still in a wait and hold pattern as well. So all your criticisms are fair. Kirk Ferentz is not the one behind Gary Barta stepping down. I do think, as I said this before as well, I don't think Kirk Ferentz's relationship with Gary Barta is maybe as strong as some people thought it was. I'm not saying that they're adversarial or anything like that, but I do think there are some ways in which Kirk Ferentz was more prepared to evolve with this new climate and the change, et cetera, taking place in Gary Barta. My point is the nepotism and the issues with offensive coordinator, they fall on not only Gary Barta, but certainly they fall on Kirk Ferentz. So if they come out this year, Mark, and are really good, like what if Brian Ferentz puts out, I don't think he's going to, But what if he puts out a top 50 offense? How will that change your perception of the program as a whole? I know it's not a one-season ranking, but if you knew, if you could look in your crystal ball and project forward like 247 Sports does with recruits, where would Iowa stand in the rankings if you knew, hey, they're going to have a top 50 offense in the field this year?
Well, that also is kind of a nuanced part of this, is that I am projecting to a certain extent, to a small extent, but I am also projecting, just like I release quarterback rankings in Big Ten and SEC, and I get all sorts of static from people that are upset because I rank quarterbacks who don't have any experience above other quarterbacks. And then I remind them when they said, well, there's no way you can rank this quarterback above this quarterback because he's never played. And I said, well, look back at 2 years ago and I ranked Bryce Young as the best quarterback in the conference. And what happened? He won the Heisman Trophy. So you can make a risk and make a projection. So anyway, there is part of that in that. There is such a track record with Brian Ferentz's offenses that if they rank top 50 in the nation this year, I would probably say some of it has to do with schedule. Some of it has to do with Cade McNamara. Some of it has to do with just, those two factors weighing heavily in that. Otherwise, because he's not proven otherwise. He doesn't have there's a lot of coaches out there. If you look at coordinators that have kind of sketchy resumes where, wow, their stint here was really good, their stint here was kind of shaky. And so you kind of wonder about fit and about obviously personnel and all those other things. But with Brian Ferentz, it's been nothing but a failure.
But Kirk Ferentz would come back to you, Mark, and say, well, if you're going to credit the schedule with, the success we're having on the field this year, then I'm going to look back at 2022 and say, hey, we had to play at Ohio State. We had to play Michigan. We had an incredibly difficult schedule, and we still won 8 games. I'm just telling you the other side.
He'd say he won 8 games, but he would say, and then I would counter with, and you had the 131st rated offense in the country.
Mark, and he would say, as long as we win the games, that's all we care about, right? Why do we play the games? We play to win.
Yeah, and you had 7 points on the board against a bad Nebraska team trying to win a division championship until late in the game because you have a horrible offense.
We win as a team and we lose.
My response.
We win as a team and we lose as a team, Mark. I'm just telling you, man. That is what he's going to say.
We could cite that Indiana and Rutgers play the same schedule and the same difficult opponents, and they have better ranked offenses.
That's true. That's a fair point. That's a very fair point. But they're not winning 7 to 8 games.
No, but we're talking about offensive performance and the performance of your offensive coordinator, which
I
is
do
horrible.
find it funny. I'll just say this real quick, and then we're done. We can be done. But I just want to say this. I find it funny when I hear, you understand these 17 to 18-year-old kids who are coming to a new school. We deal with these new athletes every year. We're constantly interviewing players and talking about players. This is their life, Mark. So like these individuals, they get to school and this is, I don't want to say the climax of their life. Hopefully it's not the climax of their life, but this is a huge moment in their life. They're not going to rip the school they're about to come into. But I've talked to these different Iowa athletes that are coming to school and players, especially that are on offense, and say, well, one of the reasonable questions to ask is, what gives you reason to think Brian Ferentz is a good coach? Kirk Ferentz is going to get it done. This offense is going to get better. And I always find it interesting to hear some of the responses. All right. One response that comes to mind was something like, well, even last year they complimented the offense. You could see how Iowa runs, they're run first, but they run a complementary offense. You can't have one without the other. So yeah, I mean, their ranking wasn't the best, but they still won football games, and that's the name of the game. So they're kind of like, that's just kind of like the Kirk Ferentz language. And that's exactly what Kirk Ferentz says. But I excuse it less with Kirk because he's not a 17 to 18-year-old kid making a life-altering decision by attending Iowa. So, again, I totally understand why the kids do that. But I also think that's just lip service, and that's why the transfer portal is still a concern because, we've seen a couple of years of it now, but as we go further along here, if the problems aren't corrected, especially with the personnel moves Iowa has made, it's hard to imagine that they're not going to continue to have. They suffered a lot of attrition via the transfer portal on offense this past season. Some people would say it's for the better because they needed an overhaul, but they're going to continue to suffer from that. And Mark, if this offense is terrible again this year, would it shock you at all, if Caleb Brown enters the transfer portal at the end of the season? It wouldn't shock me in the least, knowing he had opportunities at Big 12 and SEC schools, and he actually turned down the opportunities to visit, which thank your lucky stars he did, Mark. But that is the era. This is, you no longer are stuck somewhere. Not that they've ever been really stuck, but it's so easy to just jump up and go somewhere else. So that'll be the storyline moving forward. This is why it's another reason why it's such an important year for this offense to take a big step forward.
Was the Purdue game the only game last season where the the offense complemented the defense in bringing home a win?
That's a great question. Purdue game. So I was at that game, if you recall.
Yeah, you were at the game. They had like 200 yards rushing, of course.
They did. I just remember what I don't think I need to say his name. What a future, a legendary football coach who happens to host a post-game show with me after every game on Saturdays in the fall, what he had to say about that Purdue defense after that game. And I'm not going to try to quote him, but I'll paraphrase something he said. I believe he said something to the extent of, it was one of the worst performances from a defensive backfield he'd ever seen. Like, guys just like didn't even want to look like they didn't even want to tackle. And I'll stand by that. When you're watching it live in the stands, you don't really notice those things, but you go back and watch that, man. It was like, what on earth? And then Purdue came back the next week. Like, I am not taking, well, maybe I am taking something away from Iowa, but it's easy. It sounds like I'm just saying, well, I don't want to give Iowa credit, so let's figure it. No, this is Don Patterson. There I go. I said his name. This is Don Patterson. He wasn't trying to take credit away from Iowa. He was simply stating what he saw on the football field, that Purdue defense was terrible that day. Terrible. And in conditions where you'd think it'd be a defensive game. Remember the game up in Chicago that same day between Ohio State and the Wildcats? I mean, now I know it's a little different running the football, but man, that was a coming out party for Caleb Johnson. Hopefully that, carries itself into this season. But no, you could argue that they complemented the offense, complemented the defense, but man, that game, that was more so a result of a very confusing and confused Purdue secondary.
They haven't played a game in the last 2 years where you would say, even though they've won 18 games in the last two seasons, where the offense we're not talking about the offense winning the game, just complementing the defense.
In the last two seasons?
Yeah.
No, I mean, Purdue would be the one argument last year, right?
Yeah.
I don't know when else could you make that. I mean, they were okay during a small stretch at Iowa State a couple of years back, but man, I mean, when you go back and look, they had didn't they have like 3 Brock Purdy interceptions? They had a fumble recovery for a touchdown.
They scored 27 points, but yeah, it was so defensive driven. And the Maryland game, they just killed them, and they had like 7 turnovers on defense, and the offense had a nice day.
You could argue they complemented it. I think, not to say your question's bad, Mark, but I think an even better question that Don Patterson has brought up before is, when's the last time you've seen the Iowa offense save the Iowa defense?
Well, I've raised that question as well. And the game that comes to mind for me is the Iowa State game, 44-41.
2017.
Yeah.
6 years ago. Yeah. 6 years ago, Mark. But I think that's fair. I go back and look at the schedules, but I think that is the last time it happened. I'll say this. I bet that changes this year. I know that doesn't seem like it should be some crazy statement, but I'm guessing there might be a game this year. Again, with the lack of depth at corner and with some of the inexperience still at linebacker, where Cade McNamara and Eric Hall and those guys need to find a way to win.
They played a strong offensive game against USC in the Holiday Bowl.
Yeah, but
it was still defensive driven.
The defense ended up knocking Keaton Slovis out of that game, and that was kind of the nail that struck the coffin, if you will. So, yeah, I don't know that I'd say the offense bailed the defense out in that game. The offense bailed the defense out in 2017 against Iowa State. I mean, they allowed way too many big plays for Jacob Park in that Cyclone offense. Hakeem Butler, Montgomery, all those guys. And give credit to Nate Stanley and TJ Hawkinson and Akram Wadley and Noah Fant and just all those guys. That was a special game.
So you're okay with my 23 ranking?
Yeah, I think you're being generous. I think you're being generous because I look at a lot of people who rank. I know this isn't a coaching ranking, but you look at a lot of similar rankings from other pundits. I think a lot of people have Iowa closer to the 30 range. So I totally respect that guy at 23.
Okay. Folks, we appreciate you being here. Hawkeyes Live. We do this every week. And again, this is kind of a grassroots marketing effort here. So folks, get out there on your own and let people know that we're here talking to Corey and talking up the Hawkeyes each and every Tuesday, 5:30 Eastern, 4:30 Central. Jason Moose, thank you so much for your contributions, Jason. Jason has already contributed today on. We struck up a live stream impromptu about an hour before here because there's more talk about more reports. Sources say Colorado's in substantive talks with the Big 12. And I typically stay away from that, but as a matter of just kind of updating where we stand. And there were a couple items in that stuck out to me as being significant, if true. So we went live. And then I was a bit disappointed because one of our faithful viewers, Jackson, forwarded me the CBS SEC schedule. Well, it turned out to be nothing but a bunch of placeholders. There was actually an announcement on CBS Sports. Oh, here's the final SEC on CBS schedule. Well, there's really nothing there. So,
what do we have? What are we still? We still don't have anything more about the CBS schedule. Or, excuse me, the Big Ten.
From the Big Ten. Now, see, the same guy, same viewer, Jackson, he let me know, listen to this, that NBC has made a couple selections for its primetime games. It's week 2, according to him. I'll have to look this up. It's week 2 selection for its Big Ten primetime game. Maryland and Charlotte. And I looked at the schedule and I thought, yeah, there's slim pickings that week because Iowa plays at Iowa State. So that's gonna be a Fox Big 12 game. You know, I can see how that kind of played out where it's a pretty thin schedule. It's a really thin schedule that week. But I can't imagine that. And this is where a conference and these schools need to get together and say, this business of us running around scheduling our own non-conference games needs to stop. Somebody needs to be in charge of this to coordinate this. So NBC paying whatever it is, some crazy amount of money. I forget what each network is paying, but it totals $1 billion per year, is getting stuck with Charlotte and Maryland.
I think that cheapens the product. I think that cheapens the product to even have that game featured. I'd rather, and it'd make people upset, if I'm NBC, I'd rather throw that game on Peacock. I don't even want that game on my national. I don't care if you make a little bit more money. I don't even want that game on the nationals because it damages the product. It lessens the product.
And maybe the Big Ten should make that move and say, you know what, we'll give you an extra game somewhere else where we'll find you a quality game to give you another game.
Let's give NBC the benefit of the doubt, Mark. Maybe they thought it was actually a primetime TV show called Charlotte and Maryland, like Marilyn. Two women. I don't know. They're doing travel.
Okay. I thought you were going to go basketball on me or something.
No.
It was something else. All right. Corey. Thank you so much for doing this. Everybody check out Corey's work on From the Hawkeye of the Storm. Is there anything in particular to feature this week?
Do have a small quick preview of the Iowa regional for Iowa baseball. I'll be dropping that here within an hour. And we'll just continue to follow. I've got some recruiting videos that I've missed from past commitments that will be thrown out there over the next few weeks. And as news comes in, we'll continue to have more. But again, I got the interview with Marco Lainez dropping tomorrow, and we'll have a couple of live call-in shows as always next month.
We have more people watching right now than at any time during the hour. So you know what you do. You just stay right here and then just watch what you missed and join us next Tuesday, 4:30 Central. Thanks, Corey. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Mark.